Hey, this is Sequoia. Welcome to my podcast, Sequoia's Garden. Today is September 11, 2020, and in this, the inaugural episode, I'm going to be exploring calling cards, psychological operations, and the people of the lie, who they are, and the role they're playing in the slowly metastasizing totalitarian state that seeks to consume us, our minds, our hearts, and our bodies. So grab a chair and make yourself at home and join me as I peel back the layers of this program known as the 20th century. I invite you to think together with me in this conversation about the art of spiritual warriorship on this, the 19th anniversary of the events known as September 11.
It is now 2 a.m. Andrew rises from his bed and goes to the bureau. He picks up his cell phone, checks to make sure it is turned off, and walks into the main loft area, where he stops, stunned by what he sees. Arrayed around his dining table are the artifacts of a meeting that has been interrupted. Notebooks, pens and pencils, coffee cups, half-eaten pastries. Along the far wall of Andrew's penthouse, the trio of French doors and the view of the Washington Monument has disappeared. In their place, a group of people in office attire are standing along a series of tall, narrow windows looking outside. The light coming in through the windows is bright. It is an early September morning, but there is a flickering, smoky cast to the sky. As Andrew stands looking at the people and taking in the changes to his loft, the elevator chimes. Its doors glide open. 3 more people step out, and the elevator closes silently behind them.
We heard something in the elevator.
They pass Andrew as if he is invisible. Andrew begins to approach the wall of windows, then stops. Instead, he walks to the table, pushes aside a notebook, and sets his cell phone down. The office workers at the window do not appear to notice Andrew. Instead, they speak in murmurs to each other and continually turn back toward the windows. Then, one of them grimaces and turns away, a look of horror on her face. The other 2 step back, visibly stunned by something that is happening outside. The light streaming in through the windows intensifies, becoming tinged with red. The elevator chimes again, and the people freeze and stop action, then disappear into shadow. The elevator doors open, and John F. Kennedy steps out.
So there's this podcaster whose work I really enjoy. His name is Frank, and this podcast is called Quite Frankly Podcast. And I'll put a link in the comments somewhere. And anyway, one of the things I really appreciate about Frank is the questions he asks on his show. He's really good at landing on questions that lend themselves to deeper explorations of human interaction. And recently on the show, he asked this question. What is the calling card of the psychological operation that humanity is in? And so I really liked this question for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to be kicking this around today in this podcast. So what I'd like to ask you to do is just pause for a moment and think about it. Maybe even take a second, pause this, repeat it out loud or write it down. Because it's a big question, not a small question. And it's worth taking some time to look at it. Especially, I think, today, September 11, a day that carries really powerful memories and associations for everyone worldwide, no matter what your age is. I would make the argument that the events of 2020 are in many ways not a result of, but sort of an end an end stage of a process that began to make itself known to us 19 years ago on this day. It was already well underway at that time, but that's the moment when it really burst out into our consciousness. So anyway, there's this idea of the calling card. And for clarity, let's define it a little bit more. A calling card can be defined broadly in two ways. First, as an engraved card, like a business card, bearing one's name. That's the first standard definition, I guess. And the second is as a distinguishing characteristic or behavior. And so when you think about calling cards functionally, what are they? Well, they're something we leave behind so that people can identify or get in touch with us later, like if they want to use our service or purchase goods. But there's also another way to think about the calling card, which is that it leaves an energetic signature of some kind. It's like the vibe that coexists with or attaches to somebody or to a situation. And depending on the nature of events, this more hidden aspect of a calling card can end up really wound up with a person or person's emotions and responses, so that the energy becomes, kind of takes on a life of its own or recurs again and again, and basically can appear to be part of the person who received the calling card, when in fact it was maybe placed there by someone or something else. The best example I can give of this is that if you grow up around parents or family members who have substance abuse issues, you may learn how to compensate for that in a lot of ways as a child. And when you become an adult, then part of recovering from being around people who have untreated addictions is learning to make distinctions between coping mechanisms that you learned because of your proximity to somebody who was sick, and ways of being and relating that come from your own authentic and healthy self. And it's the same way with energetic signatures of anything. They can work their way into you in a way that you would think they're you, when actually they're not. They're more like a program. So calling cards have layers and levels of this, right? So you can begin to think about that. Aspects of a calling card can be concrete, very specific, and other aspects can be very abstract, ineffable. Okay, it's just different ways of encoding memory, and memory is a very important part of programming.
Ah, Mr. Blossom. Good, you're already here.
JFK walks to the credenza where Andrew keeps his scotch and pours himself a double. JFK finds the ice, drops a few cubes into his glass. He takes a slow drink, clearly enjoying it, then gestures toward the credenza.
Very nice. Brazilian cherry, isn't it? What?
Andrew is visibly distracted, keeps turning toward the windows and the people shrouded in shadow.
Never mind them, Mr. Blossom.
What?
The people standing by the windows. We'll get to them. But first, we have some other business to attend to.
Other business?
Yes.
And what business would that be?
Weren't you briefed?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
At the windows, the light dims, then intensifies again. JFK and Andrew both turn toward the windows for a moment, then look back at each other.
What the hell is going on here?
I don't have a lot of time, Mr. Blossom. Let's get started.
Get started with what?
It's time to show up, Mr. Blossom.
JFK pours 2 more drinks.
Show up?
JFK walks to Andrew and hands him a drink.
Show up. It's a leadership concept that positive change occurs when people choose to show up.
What the hell is that supposed to mean?
Andrew tosses back his drink. JFK follows suit, then takes the glass from Andrew and walks to the table. He sets the glasses down.
So now for a minute, let's just pause. And I want you to think about, for those of you who are old enough to remember, what the morning of 9/11 was like for you. Where were you? What were you doing? Here in the U.S., it was a calm, very clear bluebird day, incredible September sky. And then in the context of that calm and beautiful day, there's this explosion in our work culture that took place at the very beginning of the workday, early in the work week. And then there was the turning of the entire world by a screen to watch as the towers collapsed in their own footprint, and the suffocating dust filled everybody's lungs and coated their skin. The lines of people walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. Just the shock of the day in so many ways. And I know each of you have your own memories. And then I think you'd like you to also think about how that dust and all the toxic poisons that was in it that coated people's skin slowly killed many people in the years and months following September 11. And also try to just for a moment recall the confusion that you felt in the days and weeks following that, the need we all had for answers, the very natural human wish for an authority who could explain it and offer some kind of protection. All of this was part of the calling card that was left behind. There were the material aspects, the traumatic event with mass casualties, and then there were the emotional, psychological, spiritual, what we might call the energetic signature, which lingers long after an event has passed. And on that day, there were just layers and levels of fear, terror, confusion. And then this was embellished over time by a massive infusion of fear porn. It was pumped into people's minds and our hearts, first by the witnessing of the event, and then by the media gaslighting, which began before the dust had even settled. It was followed by the de-evolution into groupthink, projections and blamings. Remember how Congress very rapidly passed the Patriot Act, and there was the gearing up for the war. And then there was how the average American was encouraged to go shopping. And of course, the color coding of fear. So we would know how afraid we should be. So from September 11 onward, there has been created this vast energetic signature. Let's call it a trauma bond between the perpetrators whose identities remain hidden and we, humanity at large. And I would say that's who the real target of the victim has always been. There were the immediate victims, all the people who lost their lives on September 11, as well as all the first responders, firefighters, people that lived in Lower Manhattan who died in the years afterward. And then, of course, people who died maybe of grief and suffering from the loss of loved ones. On and on and on. My point is, the trauma bond has slowly and very deliberately been wound around and within our psyches and our society right up to this very present masked moment. And it's a bond that hasn't been loosened because both collectively and individually, many, many people have not yet, not ever, looked at September 11 with a mind and heart that's unclouded by fear, terror, and the confusion of the day.
Do you know where you are right now, Mr. Blossom? My penthouse. I'm in my penthouse, and I have no idea why you're here or why they're here. It already happened, Mr. Blossom. Denying it won't make it go away. What are you talking about? Where are you right now? I'm in my penthouse. Look again. Penthouse. Mr. Blossom. Penthouse!
Andrew's phone starts to ring. Andrew freezes, staring at it. The phone continues to ring. JFK crosses to the table, picks up the phone, and answers it.
Jack here. Mm-hmm.
Hands the phone to Andrew.
It's your wife. Hello? Yes. 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 I understand. I will.
Andrew hangs up the phone and places it back on the table. Then he picks it up again and fumbles with it until he has assured himself that it is really turned off. Only then does he respond to JFK.
All right. I'll try. Very good then. May we begin? Sure, whatever. Mr. Blossom, yes? Where are you right now?
In the immediate wake of trauma, there's a psychological numbing that takes place, and it's adaptive. This numbing buys trauma survivors time. It buys time to escape. Your emotions aren't in the way. You're just trying to figure out what to do. It also gives you time to regroup. If you have physical injuries, that numbness might take a while to wear off. All of this buys time to heal, time to escape, time to regain a sense of stability and of safety. That's all very adaptive stuff. It's very adaptive. It's important. But eventually, people restore stability to their lives as their injuries heal and as they mourn losses. There's another phase of trauma recovery that starts to happen, and that is that memories will resurface. Perhaps they come back in dreams or nightmares, or there's some sort of sense of a focus on the past, or maybe even it's just a sense that the meaning in life has drained away. Any of those things and lots of other things can be a sign that there's some kind of trauma there that is trying to come to the surface to be worked through. And at this point, sometimes people do reach out for help, but others, unfortunately, and this is kind of embedded in our culture, are afraid they're going to be thought of as crazy or something, so they try to push the memories away. From the standpoint of being a trauma survivor, neither facing the memories or pushing them away is likely to be thought of as a very good option. But what the lucky trauma survivors learn, if they have the support to do the work of healing, a roadmap for how to do it, and supportive people during the process, is that by dealing directly with a traumatic event, by facing what happened and finding ways to allow yourself to feel its effects, it loses some of its power. The trauma bond can be loosened. It can be dissolved and released, and your life will go on again. You won't forget what happened, and you won't forget the people you lost or the events, but it will stop having this sort of magnetic pull on you. The other option, though, denial, which I would say is, the active refusal to admit that something's interfering with your life. It sets up a whole different dynamic. Denial is like when people repeatedly push the memories and the thoughts out of the way. They try to avoid them, and this may feel like that's what they should do. And often, if time has passed, people don't understand that this is the mind trying to heal itself. That's why the memories are coming up. You're safe enough. It's far enough away. You've recovered enough. They think, I might be going crazy. So they push it away and avoid it. And that's not adaptive. It's the opposite, actually. It's like burying a landmine in your garden, then trying to forget where you buried it, and then hoping that you can avoid ever stepping on it again.
I'm in the tower. Tower 2. The South Tower.
And what do you see, Mr. Blossom?
I see people. I see people looking out. They're looking out the windows.
Andrew starts to pace.
Oh, Jesus, I can't deal with this.
Yes, you can, Mr. Blossom.
No, I can't. Can't we just move on, get it over with?
What are we supposed to move on to, Mr. Blossom? This already happened.
JFK gestures towards the room and the office workers, still shrouded in shadow.
The task now is to look clearly at it, to try to understand.
Andrew's face reddens.
What's to understand? Some terrorists hit our buildings with planes. The buildings collapsed, we punished them, and we've gone on. End of story.
Is it?
Is it what?
The end of the story.
Andrew stops pacing.
Of course it is! We took care of that. We've moved on.
You've moved on.
What?
Because you don't seem to have moved on at all, Mr. Blossom.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You've alienated your sister.
My sister is naturally alienated.
You've destroyed most of your business relationships.
My business relationships are just fine.
You drink far too much.
Everybody in D.C. drinks too much.
And tell me again why you didn't want to answer that phone.
I didn't say.
That's right, you didn't say.
And I don't have to.
No, you don't. You can continue doing exactly what you're doing, but this, and the aftermath of this,
JFK gestures to the windows and the people,
isn't going to go away because you refuse to look directly at it. History exerts an influence, Mr. Blossom, even when we send things down the memory hole.
So the real problem with that kind of denial is that the mind, as I said, and the body won't, like the body wants to heal them. And healing, though, requires us eventually to let the truth in so we can heal. But if we're caught in denial and avoidance, we won't heal. We'll just remain in a state of suspended animation with landmines in the garden. Okay, so this calling card of the psychological operation that we're in is trauma and the trauma bond. And wherever you find trauma, you find its handmaiden, lies. Sometimes it's lies that were told by other people, like, for example, 19 terrorists with box cutters did the deed, or the towers fell down because airplanes. Sometimes it's through denial, our own denial. For example, by saying, oh, it wasn't that bad, or I'm over it, or if you're having knock-on effects like you've become very reactive to people you love. I wasn't that bad. Yes, I lost my temper, but it wasn't that bad, or it won't happen again, or it only happens once in a while, right? There's those types of denial. And then there's avoidance, which is another kind of denial, where you deliberately don't go past the location anymore because you don't want to be reminded, but you can't admit that you're really avoiding it. I just don't walk that way anymore. Those kinds of insidious things. And sometimes if things are just really so difficult that you not only can't look at it, you can't even admit that it happened, and you do whatever you can to just make it largely disappear inside your mind. If you can do that. Some people can do that, some can't. But all of these strategies are really understandable responses to psychological pain, but they're also lies. And they're in that category of the lies we tell ourselves. George Orwell called blanking out our awareness of self-deception. This is sort of that second layer of loop where you not only don't want to admit that there's something you need to deal with, you've managed to block it completely from your consciousness. He calls that the doublethink, right? There's something you're not supposed to know, but admitting you're not supposed to know it raises the issue of somebody making a rule about you not knowing it. So it's important not to know there's a rule or a person making it. So the default is both knowing there's a rule, because you have to follow it, but pretending actively that there is no rule. So you actually are feeling like, well, you're just doing it because you want to. And then, like, a really great example of this, in my view, right now, is people wearing the masks to go in and out of restaurants and then taking them off while they're at the table. That's doublethink. It's an active state of suspended belief, and it's extremely toxic. It's like dripping acid on your character to participate in that kind of doublethink. It's understandable that people want to get back to normal, that so much has gone on, but it's also a very maladaptive response in contrast to something like saying, no, I'm just not going to go out to eat until this mask edict is lifted. Right? So it's like you give in to the contract. We'll let you have your restaurants back if you'll play doublethink with us. That's participating in a lie.
The memory hole.
The memory hole, Mr. Blossom. The place we put things when we don't want to deal with them, with their implications.
What are you, some kind of conspiracy theorist? Look, I'm sorry. I just don't understand what's going on here. Lydia asked me to listen to you, but, well, I don't get it. The Titanic, the Twin Towers, the memory hole. I mean, if that's what you're doing, if you're pushing some kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy from beyond the grave, if that's what you're getting at, I'm sorry. Lydia, I'm sorry. I love you, but, well, just forget it. You're wasting your time because I'm not buying.
Let's go back to this question again. What is the calling card of the PSYOP humanity's in? So what exactly is a PSYOP, a psychological operation? It's an attempt at influence, at its persuasion. It's trying to get people to agree to do something without openly forcing them to do it. And more importantly, without them realizing or acknowledging that someone or something is influencing or coercing their behavior. So the intention of a PSYOP is not only influence, it's hidden influence, the lie wrapped within the lie. In a psychological operation, somebody is being manipulated. And part of the contract involves a mutual agreement that neither the target of influence or the perp are going to acknowledge what's going on. Okay. So, instead of acknowledging that stuff's going on, stuff just happens. Thoughts of what you should do or fears about consequences if you fail to conform, like worries about the whole going in and out of a restaurant with your mask on, are embraced as yours instead of being recognized as what they really are, which is covert and overt threats which have been injected into your consciousness by a social or mass media. And when you reach that point, when people have reached that point, there's layers of self-deception going on. So can you see how complicated it gets? And then there's another thing about PSYOPs too, which is that they work both on people who passively or actively accept their influence, and they also work on those who don't, people who are aware that there's some kind of social engineering going on, and they're resisting it. And the reason they work on both groups is because the lies are taken in and carried by people who, for whatever reason, are unable to face and deal directly in an adaptive manner with third-party manipulation. And depending on circumstances, that could be any of us. So, I'm not judging, and I would steer you away from that as well. We all have our breaking point. And the point I'm trying to make is that some people, in order to maintain a sense of control, will choose to go with the lie. They'll accept the lie. They'll use the lie as a reason not to look deeper at a difficult situation. And then, sometimes, given enough stress, they'll not only avoid looking at it themselves, they're going to start resisting and maybe even interfering with the efforts of others to face the lie and deal directly with it. Right? So in this way, even those who can see through something and who are objecting to it or actively working to resist it can find themselves swept into herd behavior, maybe because they're singled out and attacked, or because they're isolated and punished. So does any of this sound familiar? Familiar with what's happening right now in the world? Because at a certain point in a psychological operation, there's passive lying. That's accepting the clearly false narrative without question, right? There's just passive. People, like, for example, people who will tell you that they know the mask is BS, but they're wearing it just to go along. And I would argue that this is really very destructive, because truth has basically ceased to matter. And then there's the active lying, the characterized by attacks or questions on others, this active refusal to face the difficult and unpleasant truth that everybody is being subjected to the psychological operation. So, when the majority of people have decided to wear masks to go in and out of restaurants, they're actually really already acknowledging their behavior is irrational, because if they were really afraid of germs, they wouldn't be going to the restaurant in the first place. So they're participating in a way you can say that society is at that point tipping into insanity. The truth doesn't matter anymore.
Andrew begins to pace again, this time more rapidly. He seems to have lost track of his surroundings.
I mean, really, the Apollo moon landings didn't happen. Jesus was Illuminati. What the hell? What is wrong with those people? What is wrong with what people, Mr. Blossom? What?
Andrew startles. He appears confused, as if the question has brought him back from some other place in his mind.
What is wrong with what people, Mr. Blossom? People who are always looking for reasons to doubt. Doubt what, Mr. Blossom? What kind of question is that? Doubt the things that happen, of course. And how do people figure that out? Figure what out? In a given situation, what happened? I have no idea what you're talking about. And even if you are trying to make some kind of valid connection, hell, I don't get that either.
And I guess you could argue in some ways that the truth's been a long time since the truth really has mattered. I mean, until recently, the people that were in denial about and resistant to revisiting the events of September 11, they just did their own thing. They would fling the word conspiracy theorist at those of us who were digging into these issues. But they coexisted with us, and those researchers and others who were spending time and energy facing difficult truths, both about that day and other things that have come to light for some of us as a result of digging, and my own inquiries into conspiracies, if you wish to call them that. And I would call myself a conspiracy analyst, not a conspiracy theorist, is that there was maybe a way in which people that comforted themselves with the idea that over time more people would wake up, and that we would just people would just continue each to work on their own little piece of things. But with the advent of COVID-19 and the engineered riots and the massive number of people who are cooperating with the doublethink of the masks and the mindless conformity, I'm beginning to think it's important to question whether that assumption is wise anymore. Is live and let live with regard to COVID and the fear porn and all of the ways in which this psychological operation is being consistently tightened on people? Is there any reason to assume that live and let live is good enough anymore? Or does there need to be a much more active pushback? I mean, here in the United States, culturally, pushback is not something we're comfortable with. We have a society that's tolerant. We have freedom of speech. Most people just agree to disagree and leave it at that. But our public space, the room in which we have to speak truth, has become extremely small. And that's not the only thing. If you've seen someone driving alone in a closed vehicle with a mask and blue surgical gloves on, that should also shake you from the complacent belief that those who have succumbed whole hog to the fear of everyone, psyop, which is what's going on now, will be easily persuaded to let it go. The history of the last 19 years and the resistance of people to revisiting September 11 suggests very much the opposite. It suggests that many of the people that you see around you right now that are wearing masks may stay that way for the rest of their lives. I hope that's not true, but I am the sort of person who prefers pragmatic, harsh truths to unicorn fantasies.
As Andrew talks, JFK returns to the credenza, pours another scotch, walks to Andrew and hands it to him.
Go ahead, Mr. Blossom.
Andrew throws back the drink, then stands with the empty glass in his hand, as if he is unsure what to do with it. JFK watches him very intently, saying nothing for a time, then reaches out and takes the glass.
Mr. Blossom.
Yes?
I'm curious about something.
What?
Do you consider yourself a patriot?
What?
A patriot. Do you consider yourself one?
Of course I do.
And what does that word mean to you?
What?
Patriot. What does that word mean to you? I expect it means what it always meant. Which is what, exactly?
The phone starts to ring again. Andrew freezes, watching it ring. On the third ring, Andrew rushes to the table, grabs the phone and fumbles with it, trying to turn off the ringer.
Mr. Blossom?
Andrew silences the phone. He places it back on the table.
Yes? What do you think your son would say about the concept of being a patriot if he were here? I'm not talking about my son. Do not bring up my son.
JFK responds with silence.
My son is dead. He's dead. Yes, I know.
For a moment, the people at the windows appear to be moving. Then they freeze into another shadowy tableau. JFK notes the movement at the windows and looks at his wristwatch.
Mr. Blossom, I know this is difficult, but it's important. You've already made every obvious move on the board, so let's try again, please. What do you think your son would say about the concept of patriotism if he were here right now?
Andrew is looking around, as if he has just realized where he is.
Ben! Ben! Is he here? Can I see him? Can I talk to him? Mr. Blossom, he isn't here. He could be this is the South Tower, isn't it? Mr. Blossom.
Andrew starts to pace.
It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't been hit yet. Ben, he could still be alive. Mr. Blossom, please try to focus.
Andrew covers his face with his hands.
No! No! What would Ben say? I can't say. I don't know.
There is a long pause. Then Andrew speaks without removing his hands from his face.
What would your son say?
The mask is a mark of enslavement, not only of the body, but of the mind and soul. It represents both a willing and a willful refusal to seek out and tell the truth. It's a ritual enacted by people who have agreed for whatever reason to go along with the program. The justification doesn't matter. To go along with masking in the face of all the evidence of its harm and ineffectiveness is to become a tool of a perpetrator. And history shows that once people have identified with the perpetrator, they tend to become increasingly aggressive in defense of their actions. It's part of the breakdown that occurs in trauma. It's part of that calling card.
I'm sorry? What would your son say? John? Fair question.
JFK studies the windows and the shadowy tableau.
You know, I died when John was very young. I didn't have the time with him that you had with Ben. But I'd like to think that he inherited the courage of the family line as well as some of his mother's resolve. And if he were here, well, I'd like to think that he would say, let's look at it. Let's try to look at what's happened without wrapping ourselves in a flag that, and I think he might say this as well, though I'm sorry to admit it, a flag that doesn't have the same meaning anymore.
Andrew drops his hands from his now blood-red face.
What? Who says that? How can you say that? Maybe it doesn't have the same meaning to you, but it has. It matters. It has meaning for some people.
JFK responds with silence.
It has meaning for me.
So how does all this lead to the idea of the people of the lie? Well, it's kind of a circuitous route, because so far the kinds of lying that I'm talking about are not about the people of the lie. They're the sorts of things that we can all fall into in the wake of trauma. As I said, everyone has their own breaking point in terms of a traumatic event, the point where you just can't deal with it anymore and you just give in. You just want to go the path of least resistance. And if that means you want to put on a mask, you put on a mask. And I want to be clear, I'm not judging that for the reason I just said. I'm not judging that. every human being has their breaking point. And there are some people, I'm sure, who really genuinely believe they have looked at the research and think masks are a good thing to do. So the kinds of deceit and self-deception that have to do with this issue of the people of the lie, it's in a different category. You know, for decades I used to visit Portland, Oregon a couple times a year. I'd go down there for jazz, a nice dinner, stay at a hotel, go over in Powell's Books. I have a great bookstore in Portland, and then just hang out. And I don't know when it started, probably midway in the Obama administration. Certain kinds of moralistic signs started showing up in yards around Portland. And the sign says, "In this house, we believe Black Lives Matter. Women's rights are human rights. No human is illegal. Science is real. Love is love. Kindness is everything." I don't know how much my derision toward those signs comes through, but I actually find them extremely irritating. And in recent months, I mean, they were always something that was just part of the landscape of Portland. And I live in a red, maybe it's purple county, but has always been historically more libertarian and Republican. And the first time one of these signs appeared in my neighborhood, I felt a visceral sense of anger. I consider the signs coming up here at this time as just evidence of people who have this progressive mindset, having destroyed California, Oregon, and Seattle and the urban area there, are now moving with their regressive tax schemes and their theater of the oppressed narratives into neighborhoods like mine, bringing with them their racism, their inability to adapt, adjust, or even listen to opposing point of views. So, and they're an eyesore. They're an eyesore. That's one in particular is a large sign that is probably, the sign is 6 feet high and probably about 4 feet long. And every time I pass by it, it's in my face. I've given a lot of thought, like what is it about these signs at this point in time after COVID and the riots and this ramping up of the psychological abuse of Americans, is that what the signs really seem to suggest to me is this ongoing conviction of a certain group of people that virtue signaling is the height of human accomplishment. I mean, having learned nothing from their previous failures, that they would move to this area, and the first thing they do is stick these signs up again. It's their way of saying, I am a superior person. This is a really very different level of lying. It's not the understandable human self-deception that's based in a desire to avoid emotional pain, nor is it the equally understandable desire to comply, blend in with the herd, or just go out and have a dinner to try to feel normal again after months of being locked down and stressed out. Those are really understandable human responses and needs and trade-offs. There's a lot of things going on there. But this is a pathological type of lying. And M. Scott Peck, who's a theologian and psychiatrist who wrote a lot of books in the 1970s, he really believed that this particular type of lying is in fact the root of evil. And of these people, he wrote this: utterly dedicated to preserving their self-image of perfection, They are unceasingly engaged in the effort to maintain the appearance of moral purity. They worry about this a great deal. They are acutely sensitive to social norms and what others think about them. They dress well, go to work on time, pay their taxes, and outwardly seem to live lives that are above reproach. And while they seem to lack any motivation to be good, they intensely desire to appear good. Their goodness is all on a level of pretense. It is, in effect, a lie. I think that's a really good description of my neighbor with the "in this house we believe" sign. And there's 2 or 3 other people that have put those up as well. And Scott Peck was writing in the pre-social media days, and I think we have a lot more of these type of people now. He doesn't say that it's this character defect of that this lying, trying to appear good but not be good, isn't the root of the evil. What he says is the root of evil, and how these very weak, kind of disordered people foment or create the conditions of evil, is because they will exercise political power. That is, they'll impose their own will on others by either overt or covert coercion in order to avoid their own spiritual growth. And that is what makes them participants in evil. They will not look at themselves. And I think when you listen to the rhetoric of people who are attacking Americans whose vote they disagreed with, you hear people referred to as MAGAs. It's a MAGA. Well, they're not destroying the so-called MAGAs because the MAGAs are posing a threat to them. They're trying to destroy them because it highlights their own defects, at which they cannot stand to look at. So in order to defend or preserve their own sick self, they have to destroy others. And if they can get power politically to further this aim, they will use it. And that, it seems to me, is at the heart of this malaise that's now metastasizing all around us with this relentless gaslighting that's been going on since Trump was elected, and that has become just continuous in recent weeks and months. It's in this absolute refusal of a certain group of people to do their own spiritual work. Instead, under the banner of progressive politics, or the label Antifa, or the slogan Black Lives Matter, these individuals march down the streets, protest, throw bricks through windows, verbally and physically abuse others, instigate and foment violence, kill innocent people. Then they scream at us that we're the problem. Some of them are hugely privileged and use their privilege to continue lying and gaslighting the rest of us, while they'll go silent in the face of evidence of murder and rape of children by people they consider their friends. And ultimately, this group of people, these people of the lie, demand not only our destruction because we threaten their shaky sense of self. And when I say we, I mean anyone who doesn't agree with their platform. But they don't want just our destruction. They want the destruction of what they consider our republic. All to protect themselves from what the rest of us know is a prerequisite to adulthood, which is being able to acknowledge your flaws and admit when you are wrong. Not everyone who has progressive policy as a part of their sense of themselves is a bad or narcissistic person. That's not what I'm saying. But I do agree with Scott Peck that there's a subset of people And they are probably more likely than not the ones that are in the leadership roles, because this is how pathological people operate. They continue to find their way into these positions when other people are busy having families and living their lives. They don't have anything else to do. And it's this group of people whose own flaws drive them to destroy other people. And that's very dangerous for us. Something that we need to look at. So those are the people of the lie. And that's my little riff today on September 11. Jumping off from Frank's question, what is the calling card of the psyop that we are in? Trauma is the calling card. Trauma is the way in which we're influenced to give up our birthright as free human beings, to wear the mask, to take the knee, and to participate in the continuing denial about who or what is really responsible for the tremendous carnage that we see unfolding now all around us. So this is a very somber message for a somber day. And I want to leave you with something positive, because there is an antidote to this, to the trauma bond, to the types of lying that it creates, and even to this mass of people that I think we can fairly call the people of the lie. These very unwell and destructive people among us. And the antidote is very simple and very, very difficult to actually implement. You have to commit yourself to becoming increasingly conscious about what's going on in your world. And you have to be courageous enough to tell the truth. Thanks for coming by today. I hope you'll visit again soon. And if you enjoyed those excerpts from my play, Solstice Song, A Christmas Carol for the 21st Century, the performance will be this December 21st, 2020, online, fully produced audio drama. And there'll be more information about that on my website in the coming weeks. So thanks again for coming by. In memory to all those whose lives were taken on September 11th, and all those who died as a result of all the lies that have played out since. This is Sequoia at sequoia.earth.